Hello, my name is Michaela Goclan. I am giving my final submission kind of lecture for our class, School and Society LLSS 321. I am very excited to present this. I actually was very excited. I chose the option of interviewing individuals and then doing an audio recording for it. Now, I was very excited about doing this because I wanted to gather as much data as I could. So I actually interviewed 4 different individuals and I chose them off of who said yes, first of all, and who consented to being recorded audio wise and a picture as well of them. I chose individuals with different socioeconomic backgrounds growing up, different locations of schooling, highest level of education, when they went to school, because that also plays an effect a little bit in my opinion, and then different races or ethnic backgrounds. I wanted to get a wide range of individuals because this would give me the most data to help me with the analysis after the fact. Now, like I said, interviewed 4 individuals, and they are Leandra Montoya, Khalil Burke, Stephen Lopez, and Jenna Lee Day. So, looking at each of them, I wanted to ask them all the same questions. So I asked things along a line of tell me about where they grew up, went to school, what was the community like, kind of things that were also in our racial autobiography, because I kind of liked basing it off of that because I was familiar with that, but I asked my own questions. So some of my questions were, can you tell me a little bit about where you grew up and what schools you went to, what was your community like, what was the socioeconomic community, like different aspects such as that. I then asked things like, what languages did you speak at home versus school? Were there any teachers, I didn't want them to name them, but I asked if there were any teachers that made them feel like they did or didn't belong, and just give me a brief explanation as to how. I also asked if they noticed anything in their school, like any forms of separation, dealing with racial, linguistic, economic, or otherwise. I asked if there were any certain opportunities, such as classes, programs, sports, that were available to some people and not available to others, and if they kind of knew who was excluded or wasn't excluded. And then I also asked 2 more questions. So the second to last was, did you ever feel pressure to change how you spoke, acted, expressed yourself in order to fit in? And this is also a term known as code switching. And then my last question was, were there any moments you felt judged, limited, or stereotyped by teachers, classmates, or the school system? I mainly, in this line of questioning, wanted to focus on the educators in the school system just because I want to be a future educator. So I kind of want to learn what other people have done and then possibly learn from their mistakes. But classmates also play a big deal into it as well, because a classmate could bully and pick on them, and then the teachers do nothing and pull a blind eye. So it kind of goes hand in hand, I believe, with teachers and classmates. But I also asked things like their name, where did they go to school, what year did they graduate, ethnicity, and highest level of education. So those were my 12 questions I asked. It didn't take very long, and a lot of them kind of knew instantly, if there were any instances. Now, I would like to play just a little bit of some of the individuals' audio recordings of the lesson, and I have 3 out of 4 people who did consent to pictures, so I will first display a picture of them on my cell phone, and then so you could also have a visual, because I personally like to know oh, if I'm talking about this person, then I know what they look like. But so this is Leandra Montoya. They are non-binary, they, them pronouns. If you can see, I do apologize. They're actually a student here in Albuquerque, New Mexico, at UNM from Albuquerque, New Mexico. So looking at their interview, I asked the same questions and some of their responses. Let me see if I can find a good starting point.
What schools were like in your community?
So I grew up in the, closer to the west side on the side of the west side where it was, underdeveloped at the time. Our backyard is basically the mesa, so there wasn't a lot there. The only school in that district, high school-wise, was West Mesa. There's a couple of elementary schools, I think it's Jimmy Carter, and I don't know what else, but
that's just brief, just because we have more to get through. They ended up talking about the socioeconomic standpoint from their school, talking about how they, as an individual who struggles with neurodivergence, particularly ADHD, and I did get consent to share the story as well. I just want to preface this, so I'm not blabbing everyone's knowledge and personal information, but I'm so sorry. They talked about how the community that they went to elementary school was an older community. Most of the time, the children that went to the school were grandkids. And they also talked about the homelessness was very high and a lot of drug activity. They talked about how they spoke English and Spanish at home, and they really struggled with their school with the neurodivergent aspect. So because they were biologically female and female identifying at the time, them having that neurodivergent, that ADHD, it has been shown that boys and girls separated but have the same diagnosis of ADHD present it differently. So in this case, Leandra was placed into gifted programs and was told how they're so smart and they're excellent and stuff like that. Whereas sometimes the male counterpart would be labeled as disruptive and not as knowledgeable. So there were some discrepancies in that. But overall, a good experience, no racial problems or anything like that. So yeah, and then next was Jenna Lee. This is her. I did find one with the baby's face blocked out. And she said that was okay. Jenna Lee's interview, she is originally from Florida. She is of Puerto Rican descent. Her parents actually came here from Puerto Rico before she was born. So I asked a lot of questions with her. Let me see if I can.
Orlando, Florida.
And then, what is your highest level of education?
I don't like that part. I did not realize that was okay.
Okay. All right. So my first question for you is, can you tell me a little bit about where you grew up and what schools were like in your community?
I grew up in a predominantly Hispanic culture. Growing up in Orlando, Florida, there's a lot of Cubans, Puerto Ricans, Dominicans. I didn't grow up in the best area. I would say it's ghetto adjacent, but the schools were trying to, level up their education, so they had programs of IB or gifted programs.
So talked about the gifted program. Again, hearing gifted program, didn't really go into too much detail as to maybe who got into those gifted programs. Would have loved to sit down more, but kind of running out of time. But yeah, and then she goes on to say that she had an amazing educational career. She did talk a little bit about code switching because the way she spoke at home was not how she spoke at her later high school, due to the Hispanic community being the minority, whereas her first high school was the majority. So she did change up her way of speaking to make herself seem more educated. But she didn't necessarily do that with her teachers, just her fellow classmates. That was also very known. She wanted me to make that very known. Unfortunately, I don't have enough time to show everyone's audio, but because I do have 2 more individuals, but I could tell a little bit about. So Khalil Burke is born from Jamaican immigrant parents. They moved to Queens, New York, and that's where he spent a good chunk of his childhood education. He did move to Massachusetts, and then later ended his high school career in Georgia. He is now currently serving in the military in the U.S. Air Force. He talked about how like Georgia and the school in New York were a melting pot, and everyone got along for the most part, other than your occasional bullying for young childhood things. But the teachers were amazing, and they really wanted to accept everyone. Even in the Massachusetts school, he did talk about how it was a higher level of school, socioeconomic wise. They had nicer facilities, and it was a predominantly white school with a lot more white teachers. However, he said he never felt like he didn't belong. All of the teachers were welcoming and loved his participation within the class, and he did well in that class as well. But due to parents needing to relocate for job, he then eventually moved to Georgia, which he also said he thrived in. Like I said before this, is all of my interviewees never talked about any like injustices, even though I really tried to get something out of them. But this could also be because even at a young age, like, you're not seeing this stuff unless it's happening directly to you. So I never saw this stuff, like, I didn't think about it as though, like racism or, classist or whatever, because at the time I just thought, they're just being bullies and they're just mean. It wasn't until I took this class that I realized what was actually going on in my past and able to like analyze it. So unfortunately, these individuals didn't give me much to work on when it comes to making connections to our coursework. But I also think there's more to each of their stories that I wasn't able to get out of them, and that they didn't even realize was going on. I lastly want to speak on Stephen Lopez. Now, I did not say this, but Stephen Lopez is actually my uncle, my mom's older brother, and they both went to the same high school and had very similar like high school experience. All the teachers were welcoming. The only thing is that my mom was considered a goody two-shoes, and my uncle was considered like a troublemaker. They both unfortunately suffered a lot of abuse in the household when they were younger, and even during that time, and his way of coping was taking it into school. So he was considered a troublemaker, and I even tried to push, because my mom and my uncle are Puerto Rican. I tried to push and see if it was maybe because he was Hispanic, and no, it was just because teachers and educators judged him on few actions in the beginning and just labeled him as that troublemaker and never tried to get past it. Granted, he's not a troublemaker anymore. I have my lovely little cousin. She's absolutely adorable. His wife's amazing. He had his GED, and then he is now an HVAC technician in Florida. Definitely turned his life around, because he did have a couple runs in with the law, but I think that if educators had taken the time to try and help him and maybe even like dig into his home life, I think things would have turned out a lot differently for my uncle, and he wouldn't be labeled as the troublemaker or like the bad kid. But he still did well with his schoolwork, and so his teachers themselves were not really like mad at him or didn't really punish him. It was specifically the local law. So if that kind of indicates what kind of troublemaker he was, it wasn't necessarily the school itself, it was the local community's law enforcement. But that school is actually very close. It's called Niceville High. It's very close to 2 major U.S. Air Force bases. And so it was definitely a melting pot, because it just had a little bit of everybody in there from all walks of life. But yeah, that was my interview. My process was daunting, but thank you so much for listening, and I hope you have a wonderful day.